Hey y'all, it's Kacey Kasem bringing you another episode of Get Real with Kacey Kasem. It's been a while since I put out an episode, but I've been having computer issues and it's like pulling teeth to get my computer back. So don't have a computer, it's been a month and hopefully it'll come soon, but I'm not gonna hold my breath. And then, Texas had all kinds of weird winter storm stuff going on last week, so we didn't have electricity for a little bit, which was really different, and I couldn't really do anything because no power equals no computer to turn on equals no podcast. But never fear, on another computer, got it going. Hopefully, I didn't lose 3 episodes with the whole computer meltdown, but I do have 2 that I can drop, and I'm going to drop this one right now. You guys are going to be really excited about this one. I interviewed Matthew Berry, the talented Mr. Roto himself, the face of ESPN Fantasy. And it was one of the greatest conversations I've had in a very, very long time. I mean, every conversation I have on this podcast is pretty great, but I went on and on with Matthew about all kinds of stuff, and it was just a lot of fun. So we talked about him coming up in the industry and how that all happened. We talked advice for new people in the industry. We talked about players and their attitude towards fantasy football. And we talked about the upside and downside of social media. So it was a lot of fun. And Matthew is just a great, great conversationalist. So I had a blast talking to him. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this as well. Now, you probably are already following him, but if you're not, you need to follow him on Twitter at Matthew Berry TMR. And also, if you're not following me on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter at DKCKasem. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at GetReal_pod. You can find my fantasy football writing over with the Fantasy Footballers. This podcast is also a part of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, so go check out those podcasts as well. Every podcast on that network is A+. And I'm really sorry, again, about how long it's been taking to get these episodes out. I hope I can get more out to you shortly. But I wanted to put something in your ears because this one's a good one. Without further ado, here we go with Matthew Berry. Good to go. Awesome, right. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on because you're one of the most wanted guests, and so I'm glad I got to snag you.
So who are some of the others? Who's on this list?
So
one of them. I'm one of the most wanted guests.
You're the most wanted guest. But some people just want, their friends to come on. So they're like, hey, I like this guy. So have him come on. A bunch of your follow Fridays and stuff. So
I appreciate that. All right. Well, good. Well, glad we finally got this done. I know we've talked about it for a little while. So glad to get this done. Is the audio okay?
Yeah, it sounds good. I can hear you. So hopefully. So yeah, this is just kind of for people who either are looking to get into the fantasy football industry, even at the the smaller sites that are out there now that are coming up, or people that know you and just want to know more about you. I think that's really cool to be able to kind of get the person behind the analysts, so.
I do indeed. Sure.
Well, cool. All right. Well, I guess we'll start off with the easy question that everybody probably asks you is how did you get started in fantasy sports, like playing fantasy sports?
So easy answer is nerdy kid. I was a nerdy kid. I was 14 years old. And, as anyone that's seen me on TV knows, 14 was a long time ago for me. To be specific, it was 1984. And so just in the winter of 1983, there was a book that came out called Rotisserie League Baseball, the best game for baseball fans since baseball. And what it was written by Daniel Okrent, Glenn Wagner, and the founding fathers of Rotisserie League Baseball, which we obviously now know as fantasy baseball, but back in the day it was called Rotisserie League Baseball. I read this book, devoured. Again, I was a nerdy kid, so I love to read, still do, but love to read, and I especially love to read sports books. And so I read this book, devoured, and they made it. The book was just really well written, and just made it sound so much fun. And the name, the team names, and the press releases that they would do about the teams, and the auction and the draft, and the traditions, and they had all these great traditions in their league, really fun stuff. And so. I was a pretty good tennis player. Despite being a nerdy kid, I was actually a pretty good athlete as well, and a really good tennis player. And so I bring that up because I used to play tennis. I was ranked as a kid in the state of Texas. and had a bunch of scholarship offers and everything, and so I had private tennis lessons. And so 14 years old, I'm walking to my private tennis lesson, and my coach, a guy named Tommy Cannell, was talking with his best friend, a guy named Don Smith, and they were talking in this kind of weird language. And I walked up and I heard it, and I said, "You guys talk about rotisserie league baseball?" And they're like, "You've heard of it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I just read the book. You guys have heard of it?" And they're like, "Yeah, we just read the book." And so, like, literally, the book came out in December of 1983 for the spring season of 1984, and they were forming a league, these guys. And I think we've all been there where we've been in a league where you just need one more person.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. We just need a live body. And I happen to be that. So it was a bunch of like 20, 30, 40-year-old guys, and I'm 14, but they needed another guy. So just another person. And so I joined that. And so the Fat Dog Rotisserie League, College Station, Texas. It was a 10-team NL only, a 4x4 auction league. And I paid $37 for Tony Gwynn. That was my very first fantasy player I ever acquired. And he had a pretty good year in 1984. I don't know that he earned $37, but he had a pretty good year. And I was stars and scrubs even back then. And so that set me off, and that sort of got me into fantasy sports. I joined my first fantasy football league when I was in college. And so I've been playing fantasy sports for obviously well over 30 years at this point in my life. In 3 more years, it'll be 40 years that I'll have been playing fantasy. So quite a long time. And I will tell you that one of the great honors of my career is that I one time got to sit at a fantasy baseball auction table with Daniel Okrent. That original league morphed into something called the AARP, and the original Rotisserie League Baseball League morphed into a different league that was a little more lower speed for their advanced age, and they called it the AARP. And but anyway, I got to sit at that table and do a draft one year with Daniel Okrent, with the founding father. And we talked about it, and apparently we were the Fat Dog Rotisserie League of College Station, Texas, was one of the first 50 fantasy baseball leagues in America. Because after they published the book, they heard from everyone, because there was a place where you could contact them. They're inventing this game. This is before the internet.
Yeah.
This is before the internet. This is, like you had to keep stats by hand. You had to wait till the sporting news came out once a week to get all the box scores and add them up. Standings you got standings by fax. Like, no checking your app in the morning to see, like, or even, live scoring. No. Like, you got it like a couple of days later. Anyway, so they were very aware of sort of who had tried to start a league, and we were one of the first 50 leagues in America. And that league continues to this day, by the way.
That's really awesome. So a lot of people started off playing fantasy baseball. Was fantasy, do you know, or I'm sure you do, was fantasy baseball the first go at fantasy sports, or was football around at the same time?
No, so fantasy football was invented in 1963, actually. Okay. So, yes, I believe that is correct. So it was invented in November of 1963. It was invented by a guy named Winkenbach, and 2 other guys, and they were Wink was the PR director of the Oakland Raiders, which at the time was in the AFL. They were in New York, and the Raiders that year were 0-7. In New York at the end of a long, crappy season. They were playing the Jets, the AFL. And so Wink was sitting around with another guy that worked for the Raiders and a guy that worked for the Oakland Tribune that covered the team. And they're sitting around BSing, and they, Wink was complaining about the fact that the Raiders were crappy, and he wished he had his own team where he could collect his own sort of group of people. And so it was at a hotel called the Row Hotel in New York City. It has since changed its name, but in fact, we do a show on ESPN Plus called Peyton's Places, where Peyton Manning goes through, sort of kind of these big touchstones of NFL, right? And so for one of the episodes last year in season 1 of Peyton's Places, Peyton Manning and I actually went to this hotel in New York City, the birthplace of fantasy football.
Oh, cool.
And we had a conversation about fantasy football, and we interviewed some people. We had some fun. He's awesome. That was a very cool experience, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And so fantasy football was anyway. The 1964 season, the GOPPPL was founded. The Greater Oakland Professional Pigskin Prognostication League was founded in 1963. I want to say so it was founded in 1963. They came up with the idea in November of 1963. August of 1964, the very first draft ever happened. I believe George Blanda was the very first pick. And then in 1969, but the rule was of this league, you couldn't talk about it with anyone.
Oh.
It was sort of like Fight Club, right? Like you're not allowed to talk about Fight Club. Apparently, you're not allowed to talk about the GOPPPL. But there was a guy named Andy Musolimus, and Andy Musolimus owned a bar in Oakland called King's X. And in 1969, I believe, he introduced the game to his patrons at King's X. And that was the first time the public had sort of heard of fantasy football. And they did a very rudimentary version of it back in 1969. Andy Musolimus got kicked out of the GOPPPL because he had told everyone about it. But that's how it became public. So there's a lot of, listen, you can make arguments as to what was the first. What is it? Stratomatic. There was a professor in Michigan that did this thing called the Baseball Challenge. There's believe it or not, Jack Kerouac. That Jack Kerouac actually invented an entire league of make-believe players that he kept statistics for. That they I did a whole study about this, and I wrote an article last year. If you want to Google it for ESPN, the 40th anniversary of fantasy baseball, and there's a whole list of sort of what was first. There's a lot of different versions of people playing make believe, of using real life players and their stats for make believe, competition. And there's a lot of versions of it, but fantasy baseball as we know it, though, I would say that book, it was a very seminal moment because it was the first time that it became public in a massive way. There had been a New York Times article. There was an Inside Sports article about it. They'd been featured on CBS This Morning, I think in 1981. But the first time, there was kind of mainstream press or publicity around this fake game was that originally Rotisserie League baseball book in the winter of 1983. And so, there you go. Probably more information that you cared about.
No.
There's a little history lesson.
That's awesome information, and I will definitely have to check that article out. I don't think I saw that part, so I do know you wrote the article. I don't even remember what I wore yesterday, so.
I'm guessing a T-shirt.
Yeah. Probably a T-shirt. Yes. Probably not to work, but yeah, probably a T-shirt when I got home. That would be my entire closet. So you're right. You were talking about tennis and how you played tennis growing up. What was the appeal of tennis that drew you to playing tennis?
I was good at it.
There you go.
Is the answer? My father was a really good tennis player. And he played for the University of Denver. He played D1 tennis. He was their number one seed his senior year. He was really good. And so, as a tennis player, I grew up with a racket in my hand. And from the time I was 10 years old until I was 18, I probably played tennis every day of my life. And so I played a lot of tennis, and I was naturally really good at it. And won a lot of tournaments. And like I said, I eventually ended up quitting it I don't know if you care about this, but I eventually ended up quitting it because I sort of got burned out on it. And I had a real honest conversation with my coach. And like I said, I had, I was like, whatever. I was ranked in the state of Texas as a junior. And I got invited to play in, a couple of national tournaments, but certainly all the big Texas tournaments for juniors back then. I was the first freshman in 35 years to win my district title. And at my high school, my team went to the state finals my junior year, and I was the number one seed. I was, the number one player on my team. So I was good, and I got recruited to play D1 tennis. And so I had a very honest conversation with my tennis coach, same guy that was in my league, about it, and asked him where I was. And he said to me, he said, here's the thing. He said, you're very good at tennis, obviously. He said, you are good enough to make a living at tennis. He's like, if you want to spend the rest of your life playing tennis, you are good enough to support yourself. He goes, if you spent every minute training and watching film and eating the right diet and exercising and doing everything possible, he's like, and you trained like there was nobody's business. He says, if you did all that and you caught a couple of breaks, maybe you could make the pro tour. Maybe you'd be 365 in the world. He said, if you did that, if you dedicated your entire life to nothing but tennis. He said, but he goes, could you be a club pro? Could you, give tennis lessons and be the head pro at a really nice country club? Absolutely. Could you play Division I tennis? Absolutely. Could you potentially be on not the main tour, not the ATP tour, but like on a lesser tour? He goes, yeah, if you really dedicated yourself to it. He goes, but that's, he's like, that's where your talent level lies. Like, basically, you're really good. You're not great. You're not Sampras. You're not like, and so I thought about it, and I was just very honest. He's just like, you have to be very honest with yourself. And it's like, I really enjoyed tennis, but I didn't love it. I didn't love it to put the kind of, the kind of dedication that like Tiger Woods, right? Somebody like that has put into their craft. I just didn't love it enough. And I didn't like the idea of spending that much time doing it. I had worked my way through high school, actually working as a DJ at a radio station. And I enjoyed that a lot more too. And so I just sort of, at that point, it was just like, okay, I've done it. And in fact, where I decided to go was, like I said, I got recruited by some Division I schools to play tennis. But God bless my parents, who said, listen, because I was like, hey, I can go get a scholarship and pay for college. My parents, I was very blessed and lucky in this. My parents said, you know what? We've been saving for you. We can afford to send you to college. We've been planning for this for a long time. And we want you to go. Don't worry about us. Don't, if you want to play college and tennis in college, by all means, but don't do it for us.
Right.
And my father, who had played college tennis, who had been a D1 athlete, my father said, if I was you, he goes, to be a successful Division I athlete, he goes, you have to dedicate so much time to it. And I would rather you go to college and have fun, not worry about getting up super early for practice, and try a bunch of different things. Try a bunch of different clubs, try a bunch of different activities, figure out what it is you want to do with your life. Because you've decided tennis is not what your life is going to be. And I thought, okay. So I was very lucky that I had parents that were supportive like that. And I went to college. I went to Syracuse University, which did not have a D1 tennis program. That doesn't have that's a sport they don't do. But they have a great communication school. And that was what I was drawn to. And I went there and I realized what I really wanted to do was be a sitcom writer. I did a bunch of different stuff. I did the student radio station. I wrote for the student newspaper. I worked for the Speakers Bureau. I did the student TV station. I did news. I did a bunch of different things. I did a video countdown show. I did a late night talk show type thing. But I found, we did a sitcom there at the student TV station, and I found that I really enjoyed that process of creating and writing, television comedy. And so when I graduated college, I moved to Los Angeles to try to pursue a career in that. But I was playing fantasy football at the time. And again, I went to college in 1988. And so, and we started the Fantasy Football League my sophomore year. So I've been playing fantasy football since 1990.
Yeah, I can't even imagine playing fantasy football for that long. I don't know.
Doing
But
anything
yeah,
for that long.
doing
It's
anything for that
I've
long,
probably
but
been playing fantasy longer than you've been alive, Kacey, would be my guess.
yeah. Yeah, I think probably 84, so so when you were in college, you were talking about doing a sitcom and doing being involved in comedy and wanting to write for comedy. And so I would like to know more about the show that you put together. It was Uncle Bobo's World of Fun, is that correct?
Yes.
I looked that up.
Well, thank you. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was Uncle. That was what it was called. It was called Uncle Bobo's World of Fun. And the idea was because we were in a student TV station,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't really because we only had 2 studio cameras. So to do a 3-camera sitcom, because most of the student productions at that time were what I would call like 1 camera, 1 chair, 1 plant. And it would literally be like, whether it was a news thing or like MTV was really big there. So we had these video countdown shows. So where there'd be some kid in a chair next to a plant saying like, and here's the next one from the Thompson twins. And then they'd roll a 3-minute video, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I wanted to do a true 3-camera sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went and I pitched it to them and at the student TV station. And they're like, no one's ever done that before. Do you understand how hard that is? And I'm like, yeah. Not understanding how hard it is at all. But they're like, it takes a ton of people and, everything. But I read a bunch of books about how to do it. And I ended up going around to a lot of classes. Again, this is pre-internet, pre-social media.
Yeah.
So I just went to a lot of classes and I passed out flyers and I said, hey, I want to try doing this sitcom. Does anyone want to come do this with me? And we'll figure it out together. And, 60 kids showed up to the first meeting and we figured it out. And we did 20 half-hour episodes over 2 years at Syracuse. And in essence, because it was a 2-camera sitcom, because we only had 2 cameras, we had to bring in a third news remote camera,
Mm-hmm.
the kind that you would carry on your shoulder or put on a tripod. So every third shot was a little grainier than the other 2. But so the idea was, given our limitations and because the set was so small, we basically had to shoot a movie. It's a long story, but anyway, no one cares about this. But the point is that Uncle Bobo, the idea was, let's do a show about a low rent TV station, a low rent kid show host on a low rent TV station. It was basically Krusty the Clown before Krusty the Clown existed. And the idea was that if it's crappy and we knew that we weren't professionals. And so if you saw the shadow of a boom mic in the background or, the shots were a little grainy, that was supposed to be the case.
Yeah.
Because again, the show was about a crappy kid show host named Uncle Bobo, and his show was called World of Fun. And so it was a lot of fun. And ESPN's fantasy baseball writer, AJ Mass, was also a writer and actor on that show.
Oh, cool.
Random trivia for you.
I like it. So after you graduated and you moved out to LA, what happened after that? And was there a point in time that you changed your mind about what you were doing and wanted to get more involved in doing fantasy full time?
Yeah, so you're jumping ahead a bit. I moved out to LA to pursue a career as writing sitcoms, right? And so I did that. I moved out with a couple of buddies that I met at Syracuse, and we got an apartment, and we tried to get jobs, and and I eventually got a job as a production assistant, just sort of which is a gopher. I would get lunch, answer phones, deliver scripts, that kind of thing, just run errands. And so I did that for a couple of years, and and then I kept writing scripts, what are called spec scripts. They're samples. And on my 8th one, we wrote a sample, my writing partner and I, who moved out from Syracuse with me, a guy named Eric Abrams. Eric and I wrote a sample, Mad About You, which was pretty good. And we did a nice job with that. And so people seemed to really like that script, and that got us some meetings and an agent, and eventually landed us our first job. And so we were writing on sitcoms for a while. Okay. So in 1999, so now I'm writing on sitcoms, right?
Yeah.
Moving ahead. In 1999, Roto-World was, again, this was basically, so the internet had started in like 1995, and there was some sort of rudimentary fantasy stuff on the internet there, and Roto-World was there. And back in the day, there was a commissioner's product called All-Star Stats. It's now defunct. But All-Star Stats had a side site called Roto-World. And this guy, Matthew Pouliot, who, by the way, you should absolutely interview Matthew Pouliot.
For sure.
For your podcast here. Matthew Pouliot basically emailed the guys that owned All-Star Stats and said, you guys should have a news service connected to this. And they're like, yeah, sure, knock yourself out, kid. So literally for like the first 3, maybe 4 years of Roto-World, Matthew Pouliot did like every update on every sport. Like,
wow.
Unbelievable. And so Matthew Pouliot put up an ad on Roto-World, and this is back in the day of, the internet had started. So it was like, AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy, like, you've got mail. Like, it was actually a novel thing to get an email.
Yeah.
And so I emailed him. He had posted an ad. I was on the site all the time, and he'd posted an ad looking for writers. Hey, are you interested in writing for Roto-World? Send me a sample or something like that. Email this.
Right.
Sent an email, got no response. It was like jobs@rotoworld.com, something like that. Sent an email, no response. Week later, sent an email, no response. Sent a third email. Send an email like, hey, can you just reject me? I just want to know if somebody read this. Just respond and tell me to screw off, anything. Just let me know if somebody read this. And still no response. But I thought the idea of trying out, of being a fantasy writer on the side would be so much fun, because I just loved it. At this point, I'm in multiple leagues. I'm playing fantasy basketball now as well, in addition to football and baseball, and multiple leagues for each sport. And I'm super into it. And at that point, I then say, I knew I'd read the site enough that I knew that I didn't realize that Matthew sort of wrote everything, but I knew Matthew was kind of a big part of what they were doing. And so I said, I sent an email directly to Matthew. Like, if you read his columns, Matthew actually had his email at the bottom of the columns, his personal email. Again, this is 1999. And I wrote an email saying, hey, man, I'm a professional writer living out here in Hollywood, but fantasy sports is my passion. I saw the ad. I have some advice. Normally, people ask you advice questions here. My advice isn't fantasy related, but just how do I get a job at Roto-World? Because I saw this ad, no one's getting back to me. Do you know who's, making the hiring decisions? Can you help me out? Can you help a brother out? And he says, yeah. He writes me back and he says, I make the hiring decisions. He goes, that email inbox got so flooded, I haven't had time to go through it all. He goes, but I looked you up on IMDb. Married with Children is my favorite show of all time. You're hired. So because I wrote for Married with Children, I got a chance to, because I wrote for Married with Children, I got a chance to, write for free for Roto-World. Sorry. So I started, so he said, you're hired. So I remember writing him back. And I think this is an important piece of advice for people listening. I remember saying to Matthew, I said, well, don't you, because he goes, Married with Children is my favorite show of all time. You're hired. And I wrote him back and I said, don't you want to see if I know anything about fantasy? Don't you want to check me out?
Right.
Is there a test you want me to take? And he said something to me that day that I've never forgotten, and that I used myself when I was hiring writers for Talented Mr. Roto for my own blog and later at ESPN. Just basically that he said very simply, he said, no, he goes, here's the thing. in essence, basically, he says, the fact that you tracked me down the way you did tells me you're into it. He goes, and you're getting paid to write, so my guess is you're a pretty good writer. I'm paraphrasing here, but he said some essence of this. And he goes, so he says, I'm happy to give you a shot. You're writing for free.
Yeah.
He goes, and the readers will tell us. The readers will read you, and if you know what you're talking about, they're going to come back. And if you don't, they won't, and that'll be that. But we'll give you a shot, and if you know what you're talking about and you're good, people will keep reading you, and and you'll keep going. And if you don't, they'll figure that out pretty quickly, and they won't read you, and we'll move on. I'm like, okay, I got a shot. That's all I can ask for, right? That's fair. Yep. So I did that, and I did that for 4.5 years. And so I've told this story a lot. If you want a lot more detail around this story, my book Fantasy Life details a lot of this. And so I'm not trying to plug a book. I've made all the money I'm going to make on the book. You can get it, you can get a used copy for a couple of bucks off of Amazon. Like it's dirt cheap at this point. But yeah, I mean, the story is, I tell it in a lot more detail than what we're going into here. But
right.
In essence, I did that for 4.5 years. And, I don't know how deep you want to get, but in 2004, I was at that point, I was Roto-World's most popular writer. I had their most read column. I was making $50 a column. I was moving up to the princely sum of $50 a column. And, but people were starting to make money on the internet in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of money, but some. And I felt like I had sort of this big audience and, or an audience. I don't know that I had a big audience, but I had an audience, I felt like. And, Roto-World called me, and I was writing 2 columns a week, and they were paying me $100 a week.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm making $400 a month. I'm still working as a screenwriter in Hollywood at this point. I'm writing for movies now more than TV, but I'm writing as a screenplay. I'm writing screenplays, and that's how I'm making my living. So they called me up, a guy named Rick Wolf, and I always tell this story because I love to give Rick Wolf crap about it. Understand that to this day, Rick Wolf is one of my best friends in the world, and definitely one of my best friends in the industry, and just one of my best friends, period. He is a awesome, lovely, amazing human being. But he was also my boss at the time at Roto-World, and he calls me up and he says, "Hey, listen, we're trying to tighten the budgets around here, and some of the offshore poker advertising had dried up."
Yeah.
And this is before in 2004, before people felt confident, like major brands weren't advertising on the internet yet, not in significant ways. And so Rick says, "Hey, we're cutting budgets, and we'd like to pay you $100 a month instead of $400." And I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "I'm your most popular columnist. I've been here 4.5 years. And after 4.5 years, you want to cut my salary by 300%? And he says, "Well, when you say it like that, it sounds bad." And I'm like, "Rick, it is. What are you doing to me?" And he's just like, "Well, listen, the money is the money, and we're trying to and I said, "All right, well, let me think about it." And so the truth is, Kacey, is that $400 or $100 a month, I was very blessed at that time, didn't mean much to me, but it was the principle that mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had this Yahoo, at the time, Yahoo had these called fan groups.
Gotcha.
And they may still have them, I don't know, but you could basically create a fan group, a fan page for yourself. And you could set it up so that the only way you could join the fan page was to sign up with an email address. Again, in 2004, this is before MySpace, before Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snap, anything. There was no social media.
Right.
So my idea was to so what I did is, at the bottom of my column, and this is another thing that obviously has since changed, but for Roto-World, on Roto-World, you write your column and you just post it yourself. Mm-hmm. There was a content management system that you would go in, they had a backdoor link, and you just sort of put in the column and hit click, and it would populate. And so at the bottom of my column, I said, "Hey man, this year's draft day manifesto, I'm going to put in the, if you want to get it this year, when I put it out, just, you got to sign up. It's free, but you just got to sign up at this Yahoo group." And I put the link in. because my goal was just to try to suck as many email addresses out of Rotoworld as I could.
Right.
So 4 weeks later, all of a sudden, and my plan was then because I knew I was going to quit. You know, I didn't want to go down from 400 to 100 because I thought it was so insulting. So my plan was I would then go to another website and, hey, and I would tell all these followers that I now had, all these, emails that come follow me. And I had conversations with RotoWire, with KFFL, which is a site back in the day. They no longer exist, but it was a popular site back in the day. I had conversations with one other, like with Jason Gray and Masters Ball, which was a big fantasy baseball site back in the day. Big being relative, but about possibly coming over to them and working for them. So I had conversations with all of them, and but anyway, so I started this site, right? And like after like 4 weeks, we had like, I don't know, I want to say 12,000 people, something like that, which,
Crazy.
For one link at the bottom of a column in 2004 was a pretty good number.
Yeah, for sure.
It was a really good number. And in fact, it became a message board because like on this little fan group, there wasn't much you could do on the Yahoo thing, but you could leave messages. And so people would leave messages for me. Hey, Matthew, it was a lot of baseball stuff at the time, but like I'm in a 5x5 league and I'm looking for some steals. Would you make this trade? That kind of thing. And before I could get back to respond to it, people would respond and say like, well, hey, Matthew, I'm not, or like, whatever. Hey, Bob, I'm not TMR, but this is what I would do. And it just all of a sudden just very naturally became this de facto message board where people were like posting questions and going back and forth. Very similar to like what you see on Reddit, without all the cursing and craziness. But it was actually very nice, very respectful.
Yeah.
And so I saw that. And so then Rotoworld, after about 4 weeks, noticed this. And it was a little bit of like, first off, I was a little bummed because I'm like, doesn't anybody read my column? Like, what? Like, doesn't anyone at Rotoworld like freaking read? How are you guys letting me get away with this?
Right.
But finally, after 4 weeks, somebody noticed it. And someone noticed that I had now like 12,000 plus followers. And so Rick Wolf calls me back again. And he says, you're fired for doing this. And I said, totally noted. And then they noticed, I don't know, like maybe a couple weeks later, like I think it got up to like, I don't know, 15,000 or something like that. And I was trying to figure it out. And I'm just like, oh, these 15,000, like I should just start a site instead of talking to RotoWire or KFFL or any of these other guys. I should just start my own site because this is, and so I started looking on the message board. And so I had a couple of friends that were professional writers that I knew were good fantasy players in Hollywood. And then I started looking at some of the people that were messaging, that were answering, messages. And so I went to them and I said, hey, I'm going to start this website. I can't pay anything because I'm not paying myself anything. But if you want to come write and we'll give this a shot, I'm going to call it talentedmrroto.com, which was my nickname. And, interesting trivia fact, I just went through the people that were responding to a lot of messages on that message board. And I found the people that I thought had really intelligent responses. And one of them was Brad Evans.
Oh, yeah.
So that's, I gave Brad his start. Obviously, Brad, worked for Yahoo for a number of years and now is out on his own. But so I gave Brad a start. Another guy that I found on that message board that started with me was Pierre Baquet. And if anyone is listening to this from back in the old TMR days, he used to write under the name Pete Becker. But Pierre now runs all fantasy editorial for ESPN.com.
Oh.
Pierre ended up becoming the editor-in-chief of mytalentedmrroto.com. And when ESPN bought the website, came along with me, and as did a number of TMR people. And he's since risen to becoming the head of all, fantasy editorial content at ESPN. And so, and there were a couple other people, Nando DeFino, who had been a character in the book Fantasyland, asked him to join. Nando's obviously now running all of fantasy over at The Athletic. A couple of guys named Dave Hunter and Sean Swilinski if you've been on a fantasy message board anywhere in the last 10 years, you might recognize C-Dub. That's Sean Swilinski. He calls himself C-Dub, and C-DUB, and he's kind of a message board legend. Same with Dave Hunter. And anyway, so and then I grabbed a couple of buddies, and so we started this website. We started Talented Mr. Roto website. And Kacey, this is like 2004, 2005, and again, believe it or not, I'm skipping a chunk of the story, but because I'm not even talking about RotoPass, which was part of it, and
Yeah.
There's a lot there. But in essence, to get back to finally answering your exact question, which is 2004, 2005, I was in therapy pretty heavily. I was really depressed, because I was just like, in theory, I should be a very happy person.
Right.
Because I'm healthy. I'm, financially fine. I'm married. I have friends. I work in what people consider a glamorous career. I'm a Hollywood writer. I'm working with movie stars, and I just wasn't. I was miserable, and the only thing that I was really enjoying was this dumb website I had, this Talented Mr. Roto blog that I'd started and was trying to make a go of. And when I went to bed at night or I woke up in the morning, the first thing I was thinking of was the website. What did I need to do about the website? Not my marriage, not my friends, not my career, the career that actually paid me. And so after some heavy therapy, I realized that it took me a while to get down to it, but that I really, despite the fact that I'd worked so hard to get into show business, I didn't really like it very much. There's some aspects of it I do like, but a lot of it I didn't like. That I wasn't in a happy marriage, that my wife and I had met when we were 25 and 23 respectively. We were now 35 and 33 respectively, and we were completely different people.
Yeah. Which happens.
Which happens. I mean, I was a very different person at 35 than I was at 25, as was my then wife.
Right.
And she's not a bad person. I'll never say anything bad about her. She wasn't a bad person. She was just a different person.
Right.
And we joked about the fact that, if we had met at 35 and 33, we wouldn't have gone out on a date, let alone be married, because we just went in such different directions. We got together and got married way too young. And so I just basically realized that I came to this epiphany because I was just so massively depressed, and depression runs in my family. And I just decided that I was going to chase happiness.
Right.
And so I did that. And I decided I was going to try to make a career of fantasy sports, specifically fantasy football, but really just fantasy sports. And I was going to try to make a go of this dumb little Talented Mr. Roto website. It was 2005. And the idea that you could make a living talking about fake football on the internet in 2005 was, there were probably less than 10 people that did that.
Yeah.
And none of them made and none of those people made a really great living. They all made a living.
Right.
And but I was just I went to my writing partner and I said, listen, let's write one last movie, bank the money, and then I'm leaving show business. I'm going to try to make a go of this website full time. I said, I'll probably make less than $10,000 a year, but I don't care. I just want to chase happiness. I can't take it anymore. I got to chase happiness. I'm 35 years old. And so, I think the lessons there is that I didn't worry about what I thought would make the most money. I didn't worry about that I was 35 years old and I was throwing away the thing that I just spent 12 years building. That I decided ultimately that, like I said, to just chase happiness.
Right.
And by doing that, Kacey, and we can get into whatever else you want, but by making that decision, chasing happiness, I am so phenomenally more successful than I ever was in show business. I'm obviously much happier.
Yes.
And I've since remarried, and my wife and I now have kids, and I have a big family. But a lot of the skills that I thought had been a waste, screenwriting, the Hollywood stuff, all ended up coming into play in my fantasy career. But I've made so much more money than I ever did as a screenwriter. I won an Emmy Yeah,
Yeah.
I left show business to win an Emmy. Like I had to move from Hollywood to Bristol, Connecticut to actually get on TV. But I did, I mean, it's so funny. Like when I was in
Yeah.
show business, I was writing movies, trying to get movies made. I leave show business and I'm actually in a movie. So it's like, it's
It's
it's been a crazy ride. And so, but to answer your question, it was that moment when I decided to sort of change direction and try to make a career switch for fantasy. And I would love to tell you I had some grand plan, and then I knew that all this would happen, and that would all be a complete and total lie. I just wanted to chase happiness.
Well, you were really important in the happiness of all those guys you listed off that were, a part of Talent and Mr. Rotor that came on to write. And, I had Andy Behrens on, and he was talking about how, that was such a game changer for him. And like, without you, he wouldn't be where he is. So how does it make you feel when you see these guys, that you once brought on to be with you blow up the way that they have been?
It's incredibly gratifying, and it's one of the things that I'm most proud of. And Andy's gracious to say that, and he's always been very gracious.
Yeah.
The people that came out of Talented Mr. Roto, I'm incredibly proud of.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we've mentioned Brad Evans, we've mentioned Pierre Bouquet, Andy Behrens, yes, was one of them. He got his start with me. Christopher Harris, who Andy and Chris are very close friends. Chris Harris started with me. Will Brinson, who isn't really a fantasy writer, he does just pure football now for CBS Sports. He's a pretty big writer for CBS Sports. Will Brinson started, the first thing he ever published on the internet was for me. He was a fantasy writer for me. Nando DeFino, Guy Lake, who you probably haven't heard of. Guy Lake wrote fantasy basketball for me, but up until about 6 months ago, he ran fantasy product at Yahoo.
Oh.
So we oversaw all of that. There's a number of people that contribute to. We talked about AJ Mass as well. AJ Mass wrote for Talented Mr. Roto. AJ Mass was my first fantasy football commissioner. We were friends from college, and then so he's one of the guys that came along with me when Talented Mr. Roto was acquired. Some of our fantasy basketball people like John Cregan started with me. He's really good. Sean Allen and Victoria Mateus, who write fantasy hockey for ESPN, started with me as well. Trying to think who else. And so there's probably others that I am forgetting, but really good. I'm really proud of sort of the coaching tree, if you will, that came out of Talented Mr. Roto, and it's something that I'm very proud of. Not just Talented Mr. Roto, but at ESPN, I hired, when I got to ESPN, I hired Stefania Bell. I was instrumental in getting Stefania Bell hired there, and some others as well. And so, and I have, it's something that I've continued to do. When I'm always available. I follow most people in the industry. It's pretty easy to get a hold of me, I think. And when people have reached out to ask, it always stays between us. But many, many people, I think many people that you'd be familiar with, in the fantasy sports industry have called me to say, hey, I'm thinking about this offer. I'm thinking about this career move. Should I do this? Should I do that? What do you think? I need a job. Have you heard of a job? What do you think of this person? And so I've done that for a lot of people. It always stays between us, and it's something that I enjoy. It's something that's been done for me many times by starting with Rick Wolf and Matthew Pouliot. And so I always feel it's my duty to pay it forward. And, it gives me great pleasure. I've fantasy sports has been incredibly giving and generous to me. Almost everything I have in this world has in some way, shape, or form come from fantasy sports. Right? I mean, I don't meet my wife or my family without fantasy bringing me to ESPN. And obviously it's how I make my living. And I've, some of my best friendships have come from it. And some of the greatest experiences I've had in my life have come from it. And so it's very important to me to leave fantasy sports in a better shape than I found it. So that's an important thing to me to do, to keep trying to, push the ball forward and help whoever I can when they've asked for it.
That's awesome. Yeah. You see you building people up all the time on Twitter. Like Twitter's been so instrumental in people moving on up, and the fact that you do like Follow Fridays and you try to get the smaller known sites and people, some sort of following. I guess you're trying to the Matthew Berry bump, as some people were telling
Yeah.
me, so
I'm trying to, I've obviously been blessed with a great platform, and I'm very flattered that a lot of people look to me, and so I just sort of started it up. And honestly, Kacey, I started it, and this is a question I would love to ask you.
Okay.
I have, it's an awkward subject, but it's an important one.
Yeah.
When I initially started it, my goal was I wanted to amplify minority voices that I feel like, and I mean this with no disrespect to anyone, but I feel like our industry, the fantasy sports industry, is too male and too white.
Yep.
There's way too many people that look like me. And there's way too many, now there's some 25 and 30-year-old white guys, but it's mostly like 35 to 45-year-old white guys, I feel like, is the majority of our industry. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of people that fit that description that do great work.
Right.
But I just think it's important to have a diverse range of voices. And I don't know why. I don't know. I remember I had a conversation with Stephen A. Smith once where he was asking me about it, and he was asking me about African-American usage. And I said, Stephen A., I don't know. He was writing an article about it for ESPN, the magazine, about fantasy sports and race. And he called me to get a quote. And I said, Stephen A., I don't know.
Yeah.
I said, our research shows that 3% of the people, this is whatever it was, a couple of years ago, back when Stephen A. wrote for the magazine. So that had to have been, maybe it's 5 or 6 years ago. So it's wild. But I just said, like, our research shows that 3% of the population that play fantasy sports are African-American. I have no idea why that is.
Yeah.
I have no idea why. I mean, you can't tell me that 3% of the population, that 3% of the African, that there's only 3% that are sports fans. We know that's
Right.
insane.
Yeah.
And if you're a fan of sports, you should be a fan of fantasy sports, because all it does is enhance the sports watching. And so I don't know what that is. To this day, I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
And I think those numbers have gone up, but I don't think they've gone up significantly. And so I can't speak to that. But I think one of the reasons, I don't think it's the only reason, and I don't even think it's the main reason, but I do think maybe one thing that could help that is if more people see people that look like them talking about fantasy sports.
Right.
And saying, I enjoy this, I play it, here's how to get good at it, here's how to do better at it, here's how to be successful at it. It's, it's not scary, it's fun, et cetera, et cetera. And so my goal in doing that was like, can I help amplify? Because we don't have enough. We don't have enough diversity in our industry. Can I help, using my position, my small little way, can I help amplify some voices that I think do good work, but that are also in some way, shape, or form, a diverse voice?
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be honest with you, Kacey, and some of it's work that I need to do, right? Because I've been sent suggestions by people, and I'm like, okay, let me check that person's work out, because I don't just want to say like, oh, you're a woman, here, follow this woman.
Yeah.
I want to earn it, right? I mean, I want to I want, when I say follow, then I want to say like, this is somebody I respect, this is somebody I personally follow as well, I enjoy their content, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But I have started to run out of people. You know what I mean? And so then I just decided,
I know what you mean.
By run out of people, I mean I've started to run out of, and again, this speaks to why we need to do more that we can to increase the diversity in our industry. But I've just started making it like, all right, if you're under 30,000 followers, because there's no shortage of people doing great work that just haven't been lucky enough to be on the worldwide leaders in sports.
Yeah. That's so appreciated. I know that the community is just so excited that you do that. There's so many of us that have, a couple thousand followers or whatever. And it's really cool that you're able to kind of, propel us out there. So a couple more eyes on our stuff.
Yeah, well, and I hope others do it too.
Yeah,
I hope,
for sure.
and what's weird is that weird's the wrong word. And listen, everyone has to do what they do with their own feed, and and there's probably some people that don't want to be quote unquote a copycat or whatever. But I just like there are a lot of other people in our industry that have large followings that could be doing this as well, and it would be nice if other people joined in as well. Like, it's not an exclusive thing to me. If anyone thinks it is not. I certainly didn't invent Follow Friday, obviously. And listen, the more people out there talking, the more people out there talking about fantasy and talking up other people and just putting positive energy into the world, like, we need it now more than ever, right?
Right. We definitely. And I always say, at least lately, I've been like, my goal is to do what Matthew Berry does for these people by, getting interactions and getting followers and stuff. I want to be the Kacey bump, I want to do what you do, I want to help people. That's why I decided to create this podcast in the first place, because I know there's so many people that reach out to me and they're like, I want a podcast, but I'm scared to, or whatever. So I want them to see that people like you, like you started out a certain way and now you are where you are with hard work and, grinding.
Yeah.
So
I tweeted that one time. I remember one time saying that to me, and, somebody tweeted at me saying like, oh, I could do your job. And I remember retweeting him, and I got a tremendous, wonderful response to this. But I remember quote tweeting him and said, then why don't you?
Yeah.
Like, everything I just described to you, like, anyone could have done what I did, right? I answered a blind ad and then I didn't take no for an answer. I sent 4 emails, finally got a response from Matthew Pulio, wrote for free, eventually got up to $50 a column, but in essence wrote for free for 4.5 years, developed my following, developed an audience that enough of them would follow me to my own blog, then grinded another 3 years, building up that blog to a point where ESPN got interested in buying it. And like, it was good enough content. I discovered enough good writers that that people wanted to come to that website. And so, and obviously then a lot of people came along the ride, as we talked about, whether it's, Brad Evans or Chris Harris or Andy Behrens or Nando DeFino or, behind the scenes people like Guy Lake or Pierre Biquet. And, and so, I don't know, like, it's just a grind, man. There's no secret. There's no secret. Like, it's just, like there is more competition than ever. That is true. But there's also, when I started, there was no social media. You couldn't start your own podcast. YouTube didn't exist. Like, there's now more ways than ever to get out there and create your own content, create your own channel. I say this to kids all the time. There is no conspiracy to keep good people out.
Right.
Like, I wrote a column, and I would recommend anyone listening to this that's looking for career advice, Google Matthew Berry career advice. And like, I wrote it this year in Love Hate, and I've written a couple versions of this column before, but this year's was good. And or at least I think it was. But it's sort of like, and one of the things I write there is like, I promise you, people are like, well, how do I get an agent? How do I get on TV? But don't worry about any of that. Yeah. Just get good. I promise you, if you are good, we will find you. We will find you and beg you to come on our air. And if we don't do it, CBS or NFL or Yahoo or somebody will. DraftKings or FanDuel. Like, there's going to be, as sports gambling becomes legal, there's going to become more and more content opportunities for people that produce compelling content that can draw an audience. You're seeing it more and more, and it's only going to continue. And, and so just get good. And the way you get good is just by doing reps, man. Like, again, we talked about this. Like, I've been playing for almost 40 years. I've been doing it professionally on some level since 1999 for over 20 years. And, and by the way, my first radio hit was in 2003, I think, 2002 or 2003. I did some stuff for like Fox Sports Radio before doing some stuff for ESPN. So, I mean, I've been in front of a microphone
Mhm.
talking about fantasy sports for 17 years, whatever it is. It's just a grind, man. Just, just get out there and do it. Right. And it there's a lot of people, I think that I don't know if you've had them on the show yet, and you should, but an example I always point to, there's a bunch of examples, but like Mike Clay.
Mhm.
Mike Clay started his own thing. Then he convinced the people at Pro Football Focus to let him start a fantasy section. He did that, did great work. And then when ESPN was looking, I said to my boss, this kid Mike Clay is doing some really good, interesting stuff that's different than anyone else out there. Let's go get him. And we did. Right? I mean, I promise you. I mean, think about the fantasy footballers, right?
Mhm.
The fantasy footballers are 3 random dudes in a garage in Arizona.
Yeah.
They're 3 random dudes in a garage in Arizona.
Right.
They had no backing of anyone. It's not like they popped on it, just 3 guys in a garage in Arizona. And they're obviously now huge. And
Huge.
they've
Yeah.
done it by just grinding, man. They put out good content and people found it and told other people about it. And, so I don't know, I just think it's a matter of being original and just getting good.
And how much of an entertainment factor do you think plays a part in, being successful?
I think it depends on the person. I
Okay.
think for me, it's a tremendous part of my success,
Mhm.
but not for everyone. I think, Kacey, this is a big thing that I would tell people, because I also see, by the way, I see a bunch of sort of bad Matthew Berry impressions out there.
Yeah.
Whether it's long intros to columns or, trying to be jokey on a podcast or whatever. And it's just don't do me, man. Do your own thing.
Right.
What part does personality play into success? For me, it plays a lot.
Mhm.
The people who dig me dig that about me. But for Mike Clay, almost none.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Mike Clay. Mike Clay is one of my best friends. Mike Clay has no personality. I mean, I say that jokingly. I mean, he does, but I mean, you
Yeah.
turn into Mike Clay not because he's particularly funny or interesting. You turn to Mike Clay because Mike Clay has dug deeper than you. His analytics, the stats that he's actually invented. You know what I mean? He looks at it in a completely different way, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I think Evan Silva does a great job. Evan Silva has no personality. You know what I mean? But Evan Silva freaking grinds, man.
Right. Right.
And when I say no personality, that's not an insult to him. Just what I mean is
Yeah.
Evan Silva, if you read his matchups column or you listen to him on podcast, he is black and white, nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
But that's what works for him, and it's great. You know what I mean? Whereas the footballers, I would say personality is really important for those guys. I mean, I think their advice is good. They obviously know their stuff, but I think the people that enjoy that show like those 3 guys.
Right.
Like those 3 guys talking to each other and the interaction that they have and the interaction they have with each other and that they have with their audience. So I think I'm a big believer, Kacey, in play the hand you're dealt and figure out what you're good at and do that and get even better at that and better at that and better at that and just hone that. For me, I think I'm a really good analyst, right? But do I think I know stats as well as Mike Clay or Nate Silver? No, right?
Right.
Do I think I'm pretty good at watching film? I do, but do I think I'm as good at X's and O's as Matt Bowen, who does fantasy for us at ESPN and who played the game, who was a NFL safety for 9 years? No, I obviously do not know X's and O's as well as him or somebody like Greg Cosell. I don't, right?
Right.
I have a bunch of contacts. I have a bunch of NFL players and assistant coaches and GMs in my phone that I text for info all the time, every week, all day. But am I Schefter? Am I Mort? No, of course not. I'm not Field Yates either.
Right.
Okay. But what I'm really good at, I think, and I'm better than anyone in the world, Kacey, at this. I am better than anyone in the world with this. I'm the best in the world at being Matthew Berry.
That is true.
I am the best at the world at being Matthew Berry. And so I just try to do that, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know how to describe it, but I do some things well. I do other things better. I know what I do well. I know what I don't do well. And I try to do the things I do well and keep doing them. And I try to I don't try to do the things I don't do well and force my way in there. And so my advice to anyone listening would be, do what you do well, hone that and get better at that. Be you, right? And, and figure out what works for you.
For sure. I mean, yeah, you're super authentic. And you, like you said, you can tell when people aren't being who they are. So don't be a clone of somebody, be yourself.
Yeah. You know, when people come up to me, when I get recognized and fans come up, and, you know, it happens a decent amount thanks to ESPN, the popularity of those 4 letters.
Yeah.
You know, they never say to me like, oh, thank you for Logan Thomas, you know, or, hey, great call last year on Darren Waller or whatever, you know, thank you for, you know, having Zach Ertz as a bust this year, whatever. They never say that to me. They always say to me, I love the story about your daughter breaking her arms, or the story about meeting your wife, or the bullying column, or your heart attack column, or, you know, I love the podcast, or like it's always me. It's always the thing they always bring up is something about me. It's never a call I made. You know what I mean? It's never, even if it's bad, like, you know, I've been listening to you. I listened to you all this year and I finished this. I'm like, did I screw you? And it's just like, nah, you know, I was down on this guy too, you know, whatever. No, but it is without fail always something that I've either written or said or, you know, done that's personable to them.
That's super awesome. And the fact that you're like so good with the people who recognize you and your fans, because you have a big fan base. So it's really cool that you're down to earth with them. And I know I met you before. I don't know if you remember, but I met you before a long time ago at the National Fantasy Football Convention in Dallas. So I met you, and yeah, that was the exact thing. I didn't go like, thank you for this player or that player. I was just like, man, I really enjoy your work. So like, you know, that's just me giving you a compliment, but hey.
Well, thank you.
No, but the fact that you were just so like willing to talk to people, like people were just coming up to you and you were taking pictures and talking, and it was just super, super rad to see, you know, somebody that we look up to. It's just like, hey, you know, but I want to go back to, you know, I want to go back real quick, just to touch back on talented Mr. Roto. Just how I know when you started that, you, like you said, you couldn't pay the people, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. So how did, besides just the like select few people that you had there, how did you get the word of mouth thing? How did that come about where you could grow the site?
It's a great question. And so what I did there is I realized I had no money, right? So I scraped it together with like $5,000 of my own money to like have somebody build the site. But other than that, because again, back then they weren't even like, you know, Wix.com or any of these you know, blogging sites where you could just sort of have an instant website. Like, so I had to pay a developer to build a website. And at any rate, you know, so basically what I realized is I had no money, and there was no social media to advertise it. So I realized the only way that I could, you know, it's the old saying, like, you know, if you can't get the mountain to come to Muhammad, Muhammad goes to the mountain. I think that's the phrase, right? You know, whatever. So, all right. So I didn't have an audience. So who did? Could I go to them and steal their audience in essence? And so what I did is I went to every TV station I could find, every radio station I could find, every website I could find. And I said, I will come on your air for free. I will write for you for free. Just mention my website. Just link back to my website. I went back to Roto World. Went back to Rick Wolf, and I said, hey man, I'm doing this thing now. You know what I mean? Like, you guys miss me. And they're like, yeah, why don't you bring all your, you know, we're going to start a message board and you could bring all your, you know, Yahoo people. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, but I'll tell you what, you guys miss my column. I'll write the column. I'll write for free. You don't have to pay me the $100 a month. You can save an extra $100 a month and I'll keep writing for you. I'll do what I did. Just link back to let me link back to Talented Mr. Roto. And they're like, okay. I wrote for MLB.com. They started up a fantasy section, and I wrote the fantasy blog for 2 years on MLB.com. Me and a couple of other guys on Talented Mr. Roto. Like I did, I don't know, 3 or 4 days a week, and I had other guys that did it a couple other days a week. I ended up getting a deal with CBS Sportsline. Thank you, Kenny Gersh. And you know, and so I ended up like Christopher Harris and a woman named Heather Cox, who wrote for me, ended up writing for CBS Sportsline. Heather Cox, by the way, wrote just she's a really talented writer. She started a very funny fashion blog called Go Fug Yourself, where her and her friend like just make fun of bad celebrity fashion. And that ended up getting sold to CBS Sports, not CBS, but just CBS Interactive many years later. And so she does that, and she's a novelist now, and she's written a couple of young adult novels. And so she's super talented. And let's see. So we got links from them, and I ended up doing a deal with NBA.com, and I wrote for them for 2 years, and we wrote, again, fantasy articles for NBA.com. We kept linking back to Towns from Minnesota, and I was doing local radio hits on, ESPN Radio in LA and a bunch of other places, just, mentioned the website. And so, just hustling, just pure hustling, and did that for a number of years. And then we didn't really get into the ESPN of it all, but in essence, in 2007, so I started Towns from Minnesota in 2004. In 2007, and I started doing some stuff with ESPN, obviously. If you're looking for free promotion for your website, where are you going to go? You're going to go to, obviously, ESPN. And so I started at local radio in LA. A guy named Steve Mason was a fan of my column, big fantasy player, and so he put me on the air. God bless Steve Mason. I do the Mason and Ireland show to this day. And when ESPN Radio in LA led to me doing like a weekly hit on cold pizza, if you remember that show.
Mm-hmm.
And they liked me there, which led to me doing like a weekly hit on ESPN News. That went well. They liked me. And then I met somebody from ESPN, the magazine. And I was just like, hey, like every stop, like I met somebody from Cold Pizza. And I'm like, hey, I'm doing ESPN Radio in LA. What if I do a weekly hit for you? I'll do it for free. What if I do a weekly hit for you about fantasy sports? I'm already sort of in the family. They're like, okay, and we'll give you a shot. And then that went well. And then I met somebody from ESPN News, and I said, hey, I'm doing these weekly hits on Cold Pizza, and I do these weekly hits on ESPN Radio in LA. I'm sort of in the family. Why don't I do a weekly hit for you guys on ESPN News? I'm like, okay. And they gave me a shot. And then I met an editor from ESPN, the magazine. And I said, I think I'm a pretty good writer, and here's a sample. And, I do stuff for Cold Pizza and ESPN News and ESPN Radio in LA. I'm already sort of in the family. Why don't you let me write an article for ESPN, the magazine? And they were like, okay. And so sort of along the way, I just kind of kept, meeting people, and that became fans of my work and liked me and helped me out. And then ultimately in 2007, they came to me and they said, hey, fantasy football has gotten big enough that we've had all these internal conversations. We've talked, we need to find our Mel Kiper. ESPN was saying, like, we need to find a Mel Kiper of fantasy football. Can we find a Mel Kiper of fantasy football? And they said, we like all the work you've done for us. At that point, the website was profitable. Like, no one was buying islands or anything like that, but we were in the black. Like, we had a good reputation. We'd won a bunch of FSWA awards, and so basically, they came to me and they said, so listen, we want to buy your website, move you to Connecticut, and make you the guy. That was 2007. And I was like, okay. And at the end of my current contract, I will have been at the company 17 years.
Wow. That's an awesome story, how you got to where you are. And why do you think it took so long for fantasy football to be something that people wanted on TV? I know people wanted it on TV, but that networks wanted to have on TV. I mean, you have dog shows and spelling bees and all of that jazz, but no fantasy for a while.
Yeah, and I still don't think there's enough fantasy. I think it's an old school mentality. I think it started from, the concern that it was gambling.
Yeah.
For many, many years, the leagues held sports gambling at arm's length, and there was just a misunderstanding. They thought fantasy was gambling. Mm-hmm. And then once they realized it wasn't gambling, they just thought it was nerdy. And they didn't think it was, they thought it was niche, and so players didn't like it. And so, and then, luckily, I think, because of some of the work we did at ESPN, because of the work we did at ESPN and other places, media companies started to get more and more behind it. The leagues realized. There was a study that came out in the New York Times that showed the average football fan watches about 3 hours of football a week. The average fantasy player watches more than 6. And I'm sure it's more now. But this is back in the day. And so then they started embracing it. The league started to embrace it. They realized it was a revenue generator and it was a way to increase audience. And so that's why. But there still isn't nearly enough fantasy. I mean, there's
for sure.
And it's just it's a lack of awareness. Honestly, what it is, Kacey, it is a lack of awareness by people in charge. And you have people in charge of these media companies that are somewhat out of touch.
Yeah.
That don't have Twitter, that don't have, forget Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat. Like, they don't have Twitter. If they do, they barely check it. And I don't think they appreciate how fans consume the game.
Yeah.
Like, I was at an FSTA panel. This is probably 3 years ago. Maybe it was 4. I want to say it was 3 or 4 years ago, but not that long ago. So 2017, 2018, something like that. And we had a broadcast panel. And they had somebody fairly high up from CBS Sports on the panel. And Seth Markman, who oversees NFL programming for ESPN, was there representing ESPN. But this guy from CBS Sports got up there, and they're asking about him. They asked him about fantasy on NFL Today. Could you see a scenario? And he was just basically like, nah. It's like, that's an internet thing. He just threw it out of hand. It's like, that's an internet thing.
Yeah, right.
Like, not understanding at all how fans consume the game.
Right.
Fans watch the game. Obviously, listen, we're preaching the converted here, but fans watch the game. Fantasy is a big driver. Sports gambling is a big driver. And, obviously, hey, I'm a Steelers fan, I'm a Ravens fan, whatever it is. Those things drive the game as well. But it's just, I honestly think you have, older people that are not as in touch at the top of their, making the decisions. And the NFL is so popular and there's such a monopoly that it doesn't matter. They can be incorrect and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there was a point in time when athletes were a lot more pushback on fantasy, right? As opposed to now. And I know they added on, people at them on Twitter, or Josh Jacobs comes out and does what he does. Well, that's a whole different story. But do you think that more athletes are enjoying the idea of having fantasy because more people are watching their sport?
The smart ones do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem is that, the thing that, like, I got a lot of grief from people in the fantasy community and fans about the Josh Jacobs things, which I didn't understand.
Yeah.
I didn't understand because I'm like, what Josh Jacobs did was Josh Jacobs said to fantasy players, "Fuck you."
Yeah.
He used a middle finger emoji, and that's what he said. He said, "Fuck you, fantasy players." And I react poorly to that. Now, the people that are defending Josh Jacobs for that move, I react poorly to anyone saying F you to me, right? I do.
Oh, for sure.
And especially when it's unmotivated. Now, I am positive of it, that there are people that are jerks to Josh Jacobs on social media about fantasy football.
Right.
Why didn't you score that touchdown? Why aren't you playing hurt? Whatever, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Some people are assholes. Welcome to the internet.
Yes.
But you cannot tell me that everyone that's a Raiders fan is super polite on social media. That Josh Jacobs has never gotten a negative comment from just a Raiders fan. Forget fantasy. But that has never gotten a negative comment from a Raiders fan. You can't tell me that every single person that's a fan of Alabama is super polite on social media. Right. You're telling me that when he was playing for the Crimson Tide, Josh Jacobs never got a negative comment? I'm sure any fan base, whether it's fantasy, whether it's Alabama, whether it's the Raiders, whether it's any team in the NFL or college, 10% of their followers are total jerks, if not more. Welcome to being a public figure on the internet. I would love to say F you to a group of people every day. You can make mentions anytime you want.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
I get fired, and rightfully so.
No, I got you. So you are one of those people who you work for ESPN, so you can't do that kind of stuff. But some of us can. So so just send me a DM and I'll get at them. No, I'm just kidding.
But I am pro player. I'm pro player. I do a bunch 100%. Of work with. I've been very upfront about this. I do a bunch of work with the NFLPA, which is the Players Association,
100%,
around
yeah.
fantasy and helping them monetize fantasy for the players.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I say the smart ones are, because the truth is, you think about James Robinson.
Yes.
James Robinson, an undrafted rookie free agent running back on officially the worst team in the NFL. They have the number 1 pick.
Mm-hmm.
You know who cares about James Robinson? Fantasy players.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And maybe hardcore Jaguars fans, but
Right.
that's it. Like, we're going to do a like, I assure you that we're doing a podcast tomorrow, the Fantasy Focus 0600, and we're doing our end of the season awards show.
Mm-hmm.
I assure you, we are the only national program this week that will mention James Robinson. Like, you know, Jaguars aren't in the playoffs. And in fact, I would argue that in the middle of the season, like Sunday NFL Countdown, NFL Today, Fox NFL Sunday, NFL, you know, whatever, Game Day, whatever the NFL Network show is, they ain't mentioned James Robinson. The only people that talk about James Robinson this entire year are fantasy players.
Yep.
And there are a lot of players like that,
Mm-hmm.
that are on small market teams, that are on non-winning teams, that have a fan base, and a fan base entirely due to fantasy.
Yep, 100%. That's how I found out about so many players, is because of playing fantasy football. There's no way I would know who.
And so my reaction to, and I've gotten into this with players over the years, every you know, now and then.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my reaction, if Josh Jacobs were in front of me, what I would say to him is, and I've said this before on social media to other players,
Mm-hmm.
where I've said, like, listen, Josh, you should not care about fantasy. He's like, I don't care about your fantasy. You shouldn't. Josh Jacobs should not hear about fantasy players and should not hear about his fantasy performance. All Josh Jacobs should worry about is, well, 2 things. 1, finding a designated driver. But 2, he should also worry about helping the Raiders win football games. That's all Josh Jacobs should worry about.
Right.
But there is no reason, but there is a group of people that are not fans of the Las Vegas Raiders, but are Josh Jacobs fans,
Mm-hmm.
that are rooting for him and buying his jerseys and, you know, buying his merch. He has merch that he advertises on social,
Mm-hmm.
that are fans of him because they have him on their fantasy team.
Right.
You don't have to like those people, but you don't have to go out of your way to insult them. That's my argument. And so,
makes sense.
And I was amazed, Kacey, at that I got some pushback from people in the fantasy industry, because, like, I'm a big believer you don't tag fantasy players.
Right.
But
No.
in this particular case, I wasn't tagging because of performance. All I said was, don't be this guy. I did a segment on a show called Don't Be This Guy, and it was about Josh Jacobs. And it was, don't be this guy. Don't be the NFL player that flips off his fans unmotivated. You know what I mean? And I was amazed at fantasy players that there was some pushback. A lot of people supported me, but there was definitely pushback from the people within the fantasy industry and just fantasy players saying, like, why are you doing that? Like, I thought it was funny. I don't care. And I'm like, man, that's how you get trampled. That's why we as an industry get treated like, the dumb little kid, like just like the punk in the corner. Like, I feel like it is my duty, and maybe this is egotistical, I don't know, but I feel like because I've been so fortunate to be given the platform I've been given, right? Thanks to the popularity of both fantasy football and the popularity of ESPN, I have a large social media following. I have a fairly big platform, and I have a pretty big rope. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to get in trouble. My livelihood doesn't depend on whether or not Josh Jacobs likes me. And so I feel like I have a duty, because of those things that I've been blessed with, to defend fantasy football until we fight for fantasy football. And so that's what I did there. And while I didn't want to, I didn't want to, I tagged him because I didn't want to sort of talk behind his back.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I'm also thinking I'm going to post this, and if I don't tag him, somebody in my mentions will tag me.
Somebody else will. Exactly. It always happens.
Like he's going to know about it. So I don't want to like pretend, that I didn't, I don't know. So whatever. He immediately blocked me. What are you going to do?
And what are you going to do exactly? I mean, we've all been blocked by a player here or there that searches their name.
Right. That's the thing. I don't understand. Like, get someone, if you can't handle the heat of social media, get someone to handle your social media for you.
Yeah, that's true.
Just 100 mentions.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure that's great advice for anybody out there that can't handle it.
It's taken me a long time, and there's times that I get into it on Twitter, and I wish I hadn't. I definitely have tweets that I regret and moments that I regret, but it comes with being in the public eye.
Tell the funny story about how you blocked me one time.
Did I?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't even know why. It was like, no, you tagged me in the tweet afterwards when you unblocked me because I sent you an email and I was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to piss you off. I said something and whatever I said, it had something to do with like, Jesus, this was so long ago. It had something to do, I'm sure, with like a sit start or something. And I didn't mean for it to come off the way it came off. And then I sent you, I was like, look, I just read your book. I'm not trying to be an asshole. I did not mean for it to come off that way. I'm so sorry. And then you're like, okay, have a good, you unblocked me and you're like, and I was like, wow,
Oh, well, good. I have no recollection.
Calling you out.
No recollection
No.
I'll say
I was probably a little punk kid who just started playing fantasy football and thought I knew everything because I know a lot of people come into your mentions like that. So that was probably me.
Fair enough. I used to block a lot. Because it's always one of those things where you're just sort of like, I used to block a lot because it's like, I don't need that negativity in my life.
100%. I agree.
Like, why am I scrolling through and reading? Why am I allowing some random that I don't know to insult me?
Right.
And I used to, now I just, I do a couple of different things. Now I'm more mature. I'm also more disciplined. I don't read my mentions very often. I also, Twitter's been better about filters.
Yeah.
So I have all those, like, I barely, I mostly more mute than I do block.
100.
I'm big on muting.
Me too.
I mean, like, sometimes when I see a tweet, I'll do a tweet and then I'll look at the replies and it's all just, this is an account you've muted. This is an account you've muted. This is an account you've muted. Like, it's all just like,
too. I'm like, why did I mute him? Oh, well, there was a reason I muted him.
Well, yeah, I will say this, Kacey, I don't block randomly. So
right.
You absolutely said something. Now, maybe
Oh, yeah.
Now,
here, I found it, Matthew.
Okay.
I found it.
Yeah.
And I did not tag you in it, just to let you know. I just wrote your name.
Yep.
I'm glad Matthew Berry didn't rank any of my teams. After seeing the ranks he gave to other teams, I'm not sure I trust any of it. August 30th, 2014.
Yeah.
And then in November you came back and you said, I got your note, be well. And I was like, oh my God, I feel like such a jerk. I'm so sorry. God, this is how we grow up, kids.
Yes, there you go. So I can tell you. So first off, definitely like back then I was probably searching my name. I don't do that anymore. I was probably searching my name. I either was searching my name or somebody tagged. Yeah,
that, probably.
And I read through the scroll.
Yeah.
So there's probably that. The other thing is like my attitude, I'm sure would have been like, okay, so it's such a like out of the blue, like I'm sure my reaction when I read that was just like, hey Kacey, like, so you just decided to randomly open up Twitter and be like, let me just take a shot at Matthew Berry. I've done nothing to you. You're just sort of
I probably was like, well, Matthew Berry won't respond to this. He'll never even see it.
So I'm sure that was that. The other thing I will say this, going back to sort of what we talked about here.
Yeah.
Is I can't tell you, like I'm very quick to block or mute people in the industry because I always feel like they should know better.
Yeah.
Because they know how tough it is to try to predict 250 people every single week.
You can't do it.
How random it is. And so people in the industry should know better. And I do that because of my position, I get asked a lot. Like, I mean, I get asked by friends people that run major media companies.
Right.
Like, I'm friends with people very high up at Yahoo, at SI, at NBC, at NFL, at CBS, like whatever. Pick a place, FanDuel and DraftKings. I'm friends with the CEOs of both those places and people underneath them. And like pick a company, and when you've been in the industry as long as I have, you know a lot of people, and I'm blessed in that, a lot of them trust my opinion, and they know that I am very active in the community. And so I will often get a call from people saying, hey, we're thinking about hiring so-and-so. Whether it's ESPN or, ESPN has asked me my opinion on people that we've hired over the years or not hired.
Yeah.
And same with other places as well. And I will give them my honest opinion. And one of the first things I do is I go look at my social media. And if I have them blocked or muted, I always tell them that. I was like, I don't know. This person was an asshole to me at one point on social media. I want to know that, and maybe that's petty of me or, small of me, but I just, who wants to feel like a jerk of like, I can't tell you, I don't want to give this guy publicity. But I will tell you that there is somebody who's very big is a relative word because I think this person has bought a bunch of followers, but this person does have a large following on Instagram around fantasy football. And he likes to attack me quite a bit. And I wasn't aware of him. And the first time I became aware of him was at an FSTA conference where he came up to me and could not have been more ass kissy. Oh my God, you're the best. I love you, blah, 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 blah. I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to make it. I've got a podcast, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. Couldn't have been more, obsequious and, just very, overflowing in how big a fan he was of mine. And then I checked him out, and it's all him trashing me, and he trashes other people as well. And I'm just like, all right, well, got it. So that's your shtick. You know what I mean? So, anyway, I
just know who you're talking about. That's why I'm laughing.
I'm sure most people do. Whatever.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever.
That guy can knock himself out.
Yeah.
But who cares? I mean, and by knock himself out, I mean just like whatever, go to town. It's not how I would conduct myself, and so everyone should do their own thing. But I guess my feeling is that there's so many people that are anti-fantasy.
Yes,
we still don't have we still we have whether it's Raheem Mostert or Josh Jacobs, or we have players that are angry at us. We're still not nearly as prevalent on major media as we should be. There are laws against sports gambling. There are people that try to lump us in. There's still lawsuits, and there are enough enemies of fantasy out there.
Yeah. That
we don't need to create it within ourselves.
No.
And so I also block it for that because
for sure.
Because you don't have to be a fan of mine. You can sit there and think, that should be me. That guy's analysis sucks. I don't think he's good on TV. I don't think he's good on the podcast. I don't think this, and this. All of that is fine. You don't have to be a fan of mine. You don't have to like me. You don't have to support me. You don't have to follow me. But what you should be doing is rooting for me.
Right.
Because
for sure.
The more successful I am, the more money I make ESPN, the more successful I am. Means every other company is going to look around and says hey, we need a Matthew Berry. Oh, wait, that guy generates revenue for ESPN. Let me go find someone for my company.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is there are people in our industry that I cannot stand, that I truly hate. There's not a lot of them, but there's a handful of people, less than 5, Kacey, but there's a little less than 5 of people that I truly hate. And the reason I hate them is because I think they're truly bad people.
Yeah.
Forget analysis. It's all just opinions on players, whatever. But I think they're truly bad people. But you'll never hear me say it publicly.
Yeah.
Because you know what? I want those people to succeed as well. Because the more people that succeed, the better it is for the industry.
Agreed.
Listen, I won't follow them. I won't retweet them. I won't be supportive of them, but I won't be anti them.
100. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I won't be anti them. I react, and the very few times that I've gotten into it, I felt bad and I've apologized and so, we're all human. But anyway, just in general, that would be my advice to anyone that listens to this is, again, you don't have to be a fan of a person or follow them or even supportive, but just don't try to tear people down. Like there's enough of it. Like the example I always use, and then I'll end with this, the example I use is I think is a pretty good career, right? I think most people would feel like if they had my career, they'd be like, all right, you know what? That was a pretty good run. I'm not saying I'm the end all be all or anything like that, but I think even if you're not a fan of mine, you can objectively look at my career and say all right, that guy is fairly successful. And I don't think that's a stretch. I have gotten to the place that I have, wherever that place is, and I've never said anything negative at somebody. I've defended myself a few times, and it's gotten to a place where I wish it hadn't. But I've never actively attacked a fellow fantasy analyst where I've started it. I've never done that. I've never said something bad about another fantasy analyst starting it off, Like I said, I've defended myself a few times.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, though.
Even then, I wished I hadn't, but I've definitely never started anything. And so it's possible to get to my level without doing it. That's my point.
Well, I was going to ask you about, yeah, exactly. I was going to ask you about all that because I don't know lately, I guess I've had more negativity on my timeline than I'm used to. So I have been doing a lot more muting and stuff, which really makes me sad because we're all in this together. It's we're a community, exactly, like you were saying. So
do you think, here's a question for you. I'm curious. This is a question for you. This is your podcast.
For sure.
Ask you.
I know. I don't mind.
You were very open. You're an openly gay woman.
Correct.
You're married.
Yes.
And I admire that. I have so much admiration for you for being as open and proud as you are. But does that affect? I feel like I noticed that more because I've been following you for a while. Whenever it was, I don't know when I started following you, but I feel I've maybe it was when I met you in Dallas, I guess. But I know I've been following you for a while. And I feel like I've noticed that more recently. And I don't know if it's because you recently got married and maybe that's because of it, because that's a big life change, or just you're feeling more comfortable. But I'm curious if A, did I just notice that? Has that always been part of your feed? Do you think that has anything to do with that negativity? Or do you think it's just, because honestly, your following has also grown. You're doing more content. You've started this podcast. What do you attribute that to?
I don't. So when it comes to me, my personal life and my wife and stuff, I've always been pretty open about everything. I do I guess recently, the marriage thing has been one of those things where it's I'm going to share more of the positivity going in my life. And I don't really care if people come at me because of, who I chose to marry or any of that jazz. It's happened. Just like being a woman is another thing that they come at you for or whatever, but it doesn't happen to me. It's far and few between. And you've got a bunch of other ladies in this industry in the same boat as me. I don't know. I think that.
But see, you know what's weird? Can I tell you something, Kacey?
What?
I actually think, and I don't mean to make light of it, but I actually think that's awesome. I think that's great. This is great, Kacey. It has nothing to do with who you're sleeping with. They hate your football takes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so funny to me when people are like, I get shit all the time for either being a lesbian or I get shit all the time for being a woman in the industry. And I'm like, I don't get shit for that. I get shit because I'm an idiot or something. That's what the people are saying to me.
I think that's total progress.
And I've been on Twitter since 2006 or whenever it started. So I've been around. People know, maybe back in the day, but I'm relatively new to actually writing, being in front of the camera. I've been a part of the community without being in the industry, so I think that helps. And just, and the fact that you it's crazy. You find people on the internet that you've never met in your entire life and they become really good friends of yours and they have your back. So if somebody comes at me, I've got 12 other people that'll come at them, so you gotta get you a posse like that and you're okay.
You're okay. But that's great. And honestly, I think that it's never fun, but it means it really does. All those cliches are true. It means you're doing something right. Mm-hmm. It's when they, it's the old thing that whether they love or hate you, it's, when they don't care what you have to say, that's when you're screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I get that. Well, I was going to ask you more about dealing with people. I know that you being the face of fantasy, basically ESPN, you're the guy. You get a lot more people that are coming to your mentions that are, they troll you or they're jealous or whatever. And I know you have to block people, or you don't have to block people. You choose to have negativity off of your timeline. What kind of advice do you have for the people like that want to be a part of fantasy Twitter, but they're just they don't think they can handle getting either pissed on because they didn't hit on a pick or a player or whatever, because you see people get really, really upset on Twitter all the time.
You do, and it takes a thick skin, and it's taken me a long time. And like I said, there are definitely moments on Twitter that I wish I had back. But my advice is a few things. Number one is so I have certain words muted. I have all whatever filters you want that you can put on there. So it's hard for me to see tweets as it is, right? And I also am very disciplined about in terms of me. I just don't look at my mentions. And I look at it a few times, and I hate that, right? Because I used to really enjoy interacting with the community, and it's become tougher. I literally, I'll be honest, one of the things I'm doing tomorrow is I have a meeting with a potential social media manager. So far I've managed all my own social media, but I'm now thinking about hiring someone to do it all for me. And I'll still write the tweets, but I just won't have to deal with all of that.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about that. My advice to other people in terms of is that, you just have to sort of have a thick skin and realize that it is part of the territory. And, Bruce Springsteen has a quote, you have to learn to live with what you can't rise above. And I think that's an excellent quote for fantasy Twitter. You have to learn to live with what you can't rise above. So if you're not going to be able to rise above it, of the negativity, you have to learn to live with it. And if you can't learn to live with it, it's probably not for you. But doing what we do, which is here's the thing. You are entering a job in which it is impossible to be successful. You're trying to predict the future, which is impossible. And you're going to make a ton of predictions because in essence, if you're any kind of analyst, generally you're going to rank. And so if you're ranking people, means, on average, you're ranking about 250 players, assuming you're doing kickers and defenses and, at least 50 running backs, at least 50 wide receivers in a week, right? It's going to wind up to be, somewhere 200, 250 players. You're making 250 predictions a week. You're not going 250 for 250. So you're already in a position where you're not going to fully succeed. So by putting yourself out there, it means that you're opening yourself up to criticism. You're trying to predict the future. You're going to get it wrong. And that's the gig. It's the old Godfather. I think is it the Godfather? This is the life we've chosen. I forget. Is that a Sopranos quote or a Godfather? It's some mafia.
I haven't seen any of it. I'm sorry, guys.
It might be Goodfellas. I don't know. But this is the life we've chosen, right? And so I always think about that if you want to, I'm reminded of an old story about Jackie Gleason. And Jackie Gleason was the star of a sitcom called The Honeymooners, which back in the 50s was the biggest show of all time. It was massive, massive hit. And Jackie Gleason was once, and he was the, whatever you want to call it, Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, whoever you think of, Dave Chappelle, pick the biggest comedian going right now, but he was that of his day. And they asked him one time and they said, Mr. Gleason, how is it so possible? How are you the funniest guy in the world? How are you the funniest person in the world? And Jackie Gleason says, man, I'm not the funniest person in the world. He says, the funniest person in the world. The funniest person in the world is the guy down the hall at your office that's always cracking jokes, or the guy you play golf with that's, got you cutting up between holes. That's the funniest person in the world. He goes, the difference between me and those people is that I have the guts to stand up in front of 300 people I don't know and say, I'm funny. He goes, that's the only difference between me and those people. I'm not funnier than them. He says, but I have the guts to get up in front of people I don't know with the attitude of I'm funny, I'm going to make you laugh. And that's the difference between, listen, I think I know a lot about fantasy football. Kacey, you know a lot about fantasy football. And the difference between me and you versus, whatever, football fan 3625 is that you and I are willing to say, like, hey, this is what I look like, this is my real name, and this is what I think happens on Sunday. I'm putting my name and my face and my picks out there. And they're not willing to do that. And that's the difference. And so if you've chosen to go in this career, good for you. Realize that that's what's going to come from it. You know, that there's going to be some negativity, but there's also going to be lots of amazing positive things. The last thing I'll say on this is that I remember one time when I was first getting onto Twitter and I was, you know, and I wasn't dealing with it as well as I do now. And I just remember one time, and again, I haven't always followed this rule, but I always hear his voice in my head. But Bill Simmons, who's a friend of mine and obviously has a lot of followers, including a lot more than me. And I remember Bill once telling me, never beef down. Never beef down.
Hey.
And he was just like, if you're going to get into a Twitter fight, make it with somebody that's got a bigger following than you. He's like, try never to do that. If you're going to do it,
if you have to,
don't beef down. Because you just look bad. And he's absolutely right. And I've always tried to remember that. Never beef down.
That is great advice. I'm going to ask you just a few simple questions just right before we go, because I usually just kind of wind it up this way. Which was more of a controversy this season? Was it the Eagles throwing the game, supposedly? I'm a Cowboys fan, so it was it was good for me, but that, or was it Taysom Hill and his multiple positions on ESPN?
I think that was. I think Taysom Hill was a bigger controversy because, you know, the Eagles game didn't totally affect. I don't believe it affected anything. Meaning that, like, listen, yes, could the Eagles have potentially won the game and the Giants make the playoffs? Yeah, maybe. But the Eagles prior to that game had said, we're sitting Carson Wentz, we're sitting Fletcher Cox, we're sitting, like, they had already ruled out a number of people that they would normally start if they were trying to win the game. And they had, you know, let it leak out. It had been reported by multiple national media reporters, including Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network, that that Nate Sudfeld would get significant playing time at some point in the game. So, you know, they tried to win, they were going to use that's. I mean, they were going to that attitude, right? And so, you know, as I said, a Giants fan, listen, you want to make the playoffs, win more than 6 games.
Right.
How about that?
Yep.
Whereas the Taysom Hill thing absolutely affected fantasy leagues and affected people that made the playoffs or didn't make the playoffs because you were able to get Taysom Hill as a tight end for a week.
Yep,
and,
I did.
You know, it definitely did. It definitely affected things. And so, you know, it's not anything that I'm in charge of. The games group at ESPN is a separate division than I am. I'm in content. And so they made that decision. I don't want to sit here and denigrate my coworkers. They made the best decision they could possibly, and they were very clear about their intentions from, you know, from the start of the season. You know, they basically said going into the season, he had played more snaps out wide than anywhere else. Not on the center as a quarterback, not in the backfield as a running back. He'd had more snaps out wide as a pass catcher than anyone else. Could you have said he's a wide receiver instead of a tight end? Sure. But whatever. Like the place where he played the most snaps was out wide, was either in the slot or out wide. And so they decided to make him a tight end. And they literally said in his write-up on ESPN, like, we reserve the right to change it if he ever becomes the starting quarterback. But we also said the week that Breeze gets hurt, and we were on our podcast and Field wrote about it in his free agent column, and I tweeted about this on social media, we literally said, pick up Taysom Hill because there's a chance to get some, like, everyone thought Jameis Winston was going to be the starting quarterback. Like, that was, you know, consensus throughout the industry. So we said, but we said, hey, pick him up because he's going to have, you know, a tight end that eligible player that might get a few extra snaps at quarterback is going to be valuable.
Yeah.
Then Friday, after the week starts, right? So we have a Thursday night game. I think it's Arizona, Seattle. We have a Thursday night game. The week has already started. Friday, Schefter breaks the news. Taysom Hill, not Jameis Winston, is going to start. Well, now what do you do? Because people have now made they may have somebody may have benched Russell Wilson because they wanted to use, you know, or somebody may have not Russell Wilson. Someone may have benched Greg Olsen at their tight end position because they were going to use Taysom Hill at their tight end position.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a can of worms, and I don't know what ESPN Games Group should have done, but they were very clear from the get go. And then game comes, he does end up playing quarterback, and immediately his tight end eligibility is stripped. What are you gonna do?
There you go. Well, I mean, and when things like that happen, or like when the app goes down, or any of that stuff, how many people are tweeting at you thinking that you're the one who's in charge of all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I get a ton of grief because I'm the face of ESPN Fantasy.
Yeah,
and that you can't sit there and say like, guys, it wasn't my decision. I mean, like, whatever. We're a team, and it is what it is. And I think the guys did the best they could given a very weird circumstance. They made a call. They stuck by it. They were clear to the consumer from moment one. It was a weird situation. And as I tweeted out, I said, listen, if I told you in May, when the NBA and MLB was canceling their seasons, when the Big Ten was saying, and the Pac-10 were saying, we're not going to play football. If I had told you in May or June, hey guys, guess what? We're going to have 16 weeks of an NFL season. 17 weeks, I should say. We're going to have a full NFL season. We're going to play every game. You're going to have fantasy football this year, but there's going to be this one weird week where Taysom Hill qualifies at tight end. You'd have signed up for that right then and there.
Yeah, it's true.
So.
That is true. You were talking about having 5 children. Are any of them I don't know their ages exactly, but are any of them into fantasy sports as well?
Sort of. So I have 3 boys that are 22, 20, and 16, and then twin daughters that are 9. The 22-year-old is more of a sports gambler, actually.
Okay.
But him and the 20-year-old both play, and the 16-year-old, they all play in a fantasy league. We have a friends and family league that we do with parents and friends of parents and their friends, and so they play in that league. But the two older ones played in they were in college this past year, and they both played in a league on their dorm floor. And the 16-year-old plays with a couple of his buddies. He plays high school football, and so he plays with some of his friends. So yeah, they're not as into it as I am, but they're into it.
And if you were still writing for shows, if you were still doing the sitcom route, is there a show out in the last few years that would be a show that you would really wish that you could write for if you were doing that?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, obviously, the league was really funny.
Yep.
Let me think.
You are the prettiest girl in the bar.
I am the prettiest girl in the bar. What's weird is I don't watch a lot of comedy.
Oh yeah.
The TV that I watch is mostly dramas and is dramas. Like I really enjoy dramas. I think because I was a comedy writer for so long, it's hard for me to, like there's a show on HBO called Insecure that I really like a lot. I think that's a really funny show. So I would maybe say that. I'm trying to think of, Curb Your Enthusiasm, of course. I don't know. I don't watch to be honest, I don't watch a lot of comedy. Like, can we bring back Arrested Development? Like, I don't know.
There you go.
Like, I loved the Larry Sanders Show back in the day. Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know that I have a great answer for it because I just don't watch. I watch reality shows and I mostly watch sports, but when I'm watching something scripted, it's either movies or dramas or reality shows.
I get that. There's not too many comedies out right now that I'm into. Like I liked The Good Place when it was out, so stuff like that. I can't really think of any comedies.
Any one of those, like Community, or any one of the, kind of the Michael Schur, the Parks and Recreation, any of those types shows would, would be awesome. Sort of smarter comedies. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I'd probably write for Cobra Kai. How about that?
Oh, there you go.
Comedy, but I've enjoyed the hell out of it.
We'll go with that. Yeah, we'll go with that. Okay, well, I know I haven't gotten to everything, and I know that you've talked about a lot of stuff on a lot of podcasts. If you haven't heard, all of it, get his book, right? Get his book, New York Times bestseller, Fantasy Life. I need to reread it because I really don't remember too much. I know that my town, one of the people in the book was from my town.
Okay.
It was in a league.
What's your town?
It's McKinney, Texas. I don't know which story it was, but it's in there somewhere. It might just be a tiny blurb, but when I saw it, I was like, hey.
I think I could be wrong, but I think it's the story of there is a woman who it was about a league that always had a crazy draft day tradition, a crazy tradition of where they picked the draft order. And one time they were at a wedding, and the bride, in between the ceremony and the after the party, they had the bride in full wedding dress with all the groomsmen were in the league, and she picked the draft order, and like I had a picture of her in her wedding dress. I think that's it. I know that was Texas. That may be McKinney. I don't know.
Well, I'll go back
We'll
and look. I'll go back and reread it.
Reread the book and let me know.
I need to. Yeah. So everybody knows where to find you, but if you want to go ahead and just tell everybody what you've got going on, where to find you. I know this won't come out for a few more weeks, but
listen, you can always find me at Matthew Berry TMR on all forms of social media, except the Fantasy Life app, where I am just at Matthew Berry. I would say to any of your audience that have listened thus far, the Fantasy Life app is great. It's a 100% free app.
Mm-hmm.
Our alerts are second to none. It is. There's a reason why we're at 5 stars in the App Store, like with thousands of users. Like, it's a great community, very positive community.
Yes.
The alerts are second to none. Some really good tools as well. So check out the Fantasy Life app, and listen, ESPN Plus. I'm a company man. You can read my stuff, Mike Clay stuff, all of Mel Kiper stuff, Todd McShay, Al Zeidenfeld does some great DFS stuff for us as well. You can watch the Fantasy Show with Matthew Berry on ESPN Plus, and there's gonna be more fantasy stuff coming. So yeah, there you go.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure that everybody listened this far, so they're gonna check all that out.
We went a long time. Maybe you make this a 2-parter or something like that.
I might need to. I don't know. I have another really long one, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. So, but yeah, I want to make this a 2-parter because people get burned out.
Yeah, it's hard to listen to 2 hours in a row. I might do an hour and an hour or something like that.
Boom. The Matthew Berry extravaganza. That's what it's going to be. All right. Well, all right, guys and gals. We will talk to you next week. Adios.